So in the previous video, we brainstormed some rhyming words and thought about how we might structure the poem, the English poem, around those words to make the most of that kind of dense, playful repetition of sounds. I'm going to read my final translation now, and let's think about the structure and how it conveys the images of the original, but also the sort of soundscape, if you like. Within the roses. Where to this inside is the outside? What woe betides whatever lies beneath their silk? What echoes of skies on the lake of these roses, these open roses? Look, so loose in their repose, with an ease that knows not that a trembling hand might spell the end. Barely able to restrain themselves, they swell and spill over, it seems, flowing from the space within into the days that close ever fuller, until the whole summer is a room within a dream. So there's a few things that I've had to change. And first of all was the word linen I found in English. That's not an easy word to find a rhyme for. So I played around with silk and found that although I don't have a rhyme for silk, there is alliteration here. There's l, k, s in a few words in this part of the poem. Lies, echoes, skies, lake, silk. So I thought that would draw together those words. Another change that I've made is in this line, which I really wanted to draw attention to, is this, and here the word verschütten. I found it a tricky word to pinpoint, and although one meaning is spill or it could be knock over, I found I actually didn't want to be that specific, but to just really emphasise the idea of the damage to the flowers, and so that's why I've emphasised the word end. But I've instead moved the idea of spill to a bit later, where in the German we had fließen, sich befüllen and fließen. In terms of the sort of structure throughout the poem, in that first half we've got lots of long I's and O's, so echoes, roses, repose. We've got I as in lies, skies, and inside. And then in the second half I've had to add in a little phrase, it seems, so that I had a rhyme for dream, a key word, because it's what we end on, so that needed a rhyme somewhere. And I've tried to keep those two halves of the poem quite distinct, with line 10 being the sort of break between them. In fact, it's ended up that my line 10, it is quite isolated in that it's got hand and end, which are two sounds or two semi-rhymes, I suppose, that don't exist anywhere else in the poem. But on the other hand, I've also kind of got a connection between this line and what comes before. Might echoes that I in the first half, and the word spell, of course, is sort of echoed in swell and spill. So I've sort of changed the structure there by tying that middle line in to both what comes before and what comes after. I don't know if Rilke would have approved, but there we have it. And also the sounds are not completely distinct, so we've also got O sound here and close, which what comes above. So the structure's not quite the same, but I think that we've got quite a lot of sort of similarity in terms of like the words fuller and summer. We're lucky that those words are quite similar. They're cognates between German and English, so the words themselves are quite similar. Moving on to the really final tweaks that we might make to our translation. I would certainly sleep on it, come back to it the next day or a few days later, and definitely read it out loud. Read it to your family, your cat, and think, is there any place in the poem where you felt you stumbled? Do you think you need to move anything around, maybe from one line to the next? As you probably saw, just as in the German, the questions don't end at the end of the line, but sort of mid-line. So there's quite a lot of fluidity between what is on one line and what's on the next. And I played around with that quite a bit. Are there any words you don't like, you still don't think fit quite right? So I recommend having a look at thesaurus.com, or perhaps you've got a thesaurus at home and can think about words with a similar meaning but which sound quite different. It's worth reading the German aloud first and then read your English straight after and think, do they have a similar pace or rhythm to them? Or do you perhaps have a very long line that seems like it should be shorter? Can you chop anything out at all? And it might be worth reflecting, is there one feature of the German poem that you particularly admired? And have you managed to achieve something similar in your translation? If not, what could you do to maybe draw it out a bit more? And before you finish, really don't forget the title. Of course, a lot of poems don't have a title, but this one does, and that was the last thing that I translated, Within the Roses. So when you're ready to submit to the prize, you'll send in the original poem, your translation, and a short commentary, which is where you reflect on the thought process, and particularly you'll look at 3 challenges that you came across while translating this poem, and think about explain how you dealt with them. So it's for the commentary, it's a maximum of 300 words, and if you're looking at 3 examples, then that's 100 words each. So it's relatively short. The examples that I've got here are in bullet points. You'll need to write that in sentences, like a short essay. I'll just talk through a couple of these examples. So linen, as I said, I found that difficult to rhyme, and also wasn't sure about the word Binnensee because it seemed to me that it was in the German poem because of the sound, and I wondered how important is the meaning. Could I use another image if I needed to for the rhyme? Eventually, I didn't find a rhyme for lake or silk, but I realised that I could tie them together with alliteration. The second point, as I've already discussed, I really wanted to make sure that that line 10 sort of stood out as being quite jarring after we've had this, the first part of the poem is so repetitive with such similar rhymes. So I thought about how to make this line stand out. I think my line isn't as isolated as Rilke's. As I've said, hand and end are quite distinct, but the words might and spell actually echo sounds from earlier and later in the poem. So this changes the structure slightly, but actually I think it still fits together quite well, and it still has a similar sort of feel to the German poem. And the final point that I would write 100 words about this word verschütten, and what did Rilke actually mean by it? One thing, I even after several readings, I still wasn't sure. How did Rilke picture these roses? Are they in a vase or are they outside on a bush? It occurred to me that it's quite a dreamy, abstract poem, so there's room for every reader to interpret it differently, and of course that might affect how we translate it. So I wanted to keep the sense quite vague there, and that's why I used the phrase spell the end, just to emphasise the threat to the roses, their vulnerability, without being specific about what might happen to them. So, we've written a short commentary. We're ready to submit. The deadline is 17th of July 2020. I think the key information here is the top prize is £1,000. So, have fun finding a poem, researching it, brainstorming ideas, and good luck.